I'm Diana. I never believed in happy endings, not really, not in the way movies told them, not in the way people always hoped for them growing up. I had learned early on that even the warmest smiles could hide the coldest intentions, and even the most tender hands could still push you off the edge. I was only 25, but I had seen enough to know that trust was a currency, and most people spent it recklessly. Still, I wanted to believe that not everyone was out to use you. I wanted to believe that love could be real even for someone like me, someone who worked 9 hours a day in a dull gray office, staring at spreadsheets and answering emails from people who never learned how to say thank you. I wanted to believe that after all the mediocre dates and pointless small talk, someone would finally see me, really see me, and I thought I had found that in Leo. He wasn't perfect, of course, but no one is. He was charming in a quiet way, not the kind of man who demanded a room's attention, but the kind who made you feel like you were the only person that mattered. When he looked at you, he listened, and that alone felt rare. He remembered things I said in passing, like how I always needed coffee with exactly 1 spoon of sugar, or how certain songs reminded me of my childhood, and he played those songs when I needed cheering up. I met him at a coffee shop near my office, the same one I went to every morning to avoid the burned brew in the break room. He had asked if he could share the small table by the window, and we ended up talking for half an hour before I even realized I was late to work. That never happened to me. I was always the girl who showed up on time, who met deadlines, who paid bills early, who planned everything. But Leo made me forget the clock, and that felt dangerous in a good way. We started seeing each other more often. First it was lunch, then dinner, then weekends at his apartment or mine. He always lit candles, played soft music, made things feel romantic even if we were just eating takeout and watching TV. He asked about my dreams. He told me about his. He was a freelance designer, or at least that was what he told me, and I never questioned it. Not that my best friend Tessa said he was good for me. She said he made me smile more, and maybe she was right. I did feel lighter when I was with him, like I didn't have to carry the whole weight of my own life alone. Tessa and I had been friends since college. We shared everything from clothes to secrets. She knew about every guy I had ever dated, every mistake I had ever made, and she never judged me. It felt good to have people like them in my life, people who made the days feel less gray, people who reminded me that maybe life wasn't just about surviving, maybe it was about feeling something real. But now when I look back, I realize that was the beginning of the lie. It didn't come all at once. It never does. Betrayal is quiet. It comes in pieces, a strange message, a forgotten explanation, a lingering glance that doesn't make sense, and you tell yourself it's nothing because the alternative is too painful to consider. I still remember the way Leo looked at me that night when he brought me a small gift, a silver bracelet with a tiny heart charm. He said it reminded him of me, simple, elegant, strong, and I wore it every day because I believed him. I believed every word he said, every smile, every touch. I didn't know that behind that smile was a secret, one he shared with someone else, someone much closer to me than I could ever imagine. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Back then everything still felt real, everything still felt warm. I was waking up to messages from him, falling asleep to the sound of his voice. I was dreaming of vacations together, of shared apartments, of maybe someday more. I was letting my guard down slowly, carefully, but surely, because love requires that. It demands that you stop protecting yourself long enough to let someone in, and I let him in. I let them both in. Now I can see how foolish that was, but back then it felt like hope. It felt like maybe I was finally building something mine. The office where I worked wasn't exciting, but it paid the bills. I handled logistics for a small tech firm, mostly organizing shipments, managing spreadsheets, coordinating with suppliers. Nothing glamorous, but I was good at it. I liked the order of it, the routine. I liked knowing what to expect, which is maybe why I didn't see it coming, because chaos doesn't knock, it just walks in, wearing the face of someone you love. Every morning started the same, coffee, emails, meetings every afternoon ended the same, more emails, more spreadsheets. The comfort of repetition made everything seem stable, and maybe that was the point. Maybe Leo and Tessa counted on that, my predictability, my trust, my blind spots. Tessa would visit often, sometimes with coffee, sometimes with wine. She would sit on my couch, curl her legs under her and talk about work, about men, about life, and I would listen and laugh and share pieces of myself, not knowing she was gathering them like weapons. I wish I could say I noticed something back, then a flicker of guilt, a moment of hesitation, but I didn't. Tessa was always affectionate, always attentive. She gave the best advice, knew how to cheer me up. She had been with me through heartbreaks, funerals, job rejections, birthdays, everything. She was more than a friend, she was like a sister, which made what happened even harder to swallow. Leo was the kind of boyfriend who made you feel lucky. He wasn't loud or overly romantic, but he showed up. He remembered things, he listened, he cared, or at least he pretended. Well, I remember the night I gave him access to my account. He had mentioned something about helping me budget, said he was good with numbers, that he could help me set up savings goals. I hesitated, but he laughed and said, "Come on, do you really think I'd steal from you?" And I didn't, because I didn't think people like that were in my life. Not anymore, not after all I'd been through and survived. So I gave him my login details. It was just easier that way. He said he'd organize things for me, and I believed him. After all, love was supposed to mean trust, right? And I trusted him, I trusted her, I trusted too much. I didn't realize how much until the morning I checked my bank app and saw a series of small transfers, nothing huge, just enough to go unnoticed. At first 50 here, 100 there, then more and more, until suddenly there was a hole where my savings used to be. I remember the cold rush of confusion, the way my fingers trembled, the way my stomach twisted. I called the bank, thought maybe it was a glitch, maybe a mistake, maybe someone had hacked me. The truth came later, too slowly, too cruelly. Leo stopped answering my calls, said he was busy, said he was stressed, said he'd call me back, and didn't. Tessa started canceling plans, said she wasn't feeling well, said she was swamped with work, and I believed them because believing them was easier than facing what I already knew deep down. That I had been betrayed, that I had been used, that I had been played by the two people I trusted most. But back then I didn't react, not right away. I didn't scream, I didn't cry, I didn't confront them, because some part of me refused to believe it completely, and another part of me was already planning, already calculating, already deciding that if they thought they could do this to me and walk away, then they didn't really know me at all, and that was their first mistake. There are moments that don't feel like anything when they happen, just a strange look or a quiet pause in conversation, a gut feeling you can't name, but later you realize those were the moments that started everything. They were the warnings you ignored, the whispers beneath the noise, and when I look back I can see it all so clearly now. The late replies, the odd excuses, the way Leo started to pull away in the subtlest ways. He used to text me good morning before I even opened my eyes. Now I was the one reaching out first, and sometimes he wouldn't answer for hours. When I asked where he had been, he would say things like, "Sorry, busy with a client," or "Phone died," and I wanted to believe him because I didn't want to start doubting the one person who had once made me feel safe. But it wasn't just the phone calls or the late replies, it was something else, something colder, like a distance growing in the spaces between us. Even when we were sitting on the same couch watching the same show, his mind felt far away, like he was always somewhere else, somewhere I couldn't follow, and I kept telling myself it was just a phase. Maybe work was stressing him, maybe he needed space, maybe I was overthinking. But it was Tessa who made me question myself the most, because something about her started to shift too. She began showing up more often than usual, sometimes uninvited, sometimes just showing up with coffee, saying she was bored or lonely, and I welcomed her because she was my best friend and I needed someone to talk to, even if I wasn't fully honest about the things that were starting to worry me. But it was the way she talked about Leo that made me pause, how she asked about him when he wasn't around, how she laughed too hard at things he said, how she always managed to sit a little too close to him when we were all together, and once, just once, I caught a look in her eyes when she thought I wasn't watching, and I didn't know what it meant, not then, but I felt something sink inside me, like a stone thrown into still water. The ripples of it would come later. I started noticing other things, little details that didn't make sense. Leo's cologne on my pillow even when he hadn't stayed the night, the same song playing in Tessa's car that Leo had added to our shared playlist, a hoodie Leo left behind mysteriously showing up in her apartment. I told myself I was being paranoid because the idea that they could be hiding something together was too much to handle. I would rather be wrong than right about something like that, and so I tried to push it down. I tried to keep things normal at work, at home, and my routines, but everything started to feel off. The colors of my life dimmed a little. I stopped wearing makeup, I started sleeping less, I checked my bank account more often, and sometimes I would stare at the numbers wondering if I was imagining things, wondering if the balance was lower than it should be. But then I'd tell myself I must have just forgotten about something, a bill, a transfer, a payment. It was easy to lose track of small things when your mind was in too many places at once, and mine was spinning constantly. I started writing things down just to keep track of them, little notes about conversations, times, dates, things people said, like I was trying to hold onto reality with a string of facts, because everything around me felt like it was slipping and I didn't know how to stop it. I wanted to confront Leo. I wanted to ask him if he was hiding something, but every time I looked into his eyes, I froze, because what if he said yes? What if he didn't lie? What would I do then? So I stayed quiet and hoped I was wrong. One night, we were having dinner at my place, and I noticed him checking his phone more than usual. He kept turning it face down every time a notification came in, and I felt a coldness settle in my chest. He used to show me everything: funny memes, updates from clients, silly messages, but now it was like the screen was a wall between us. I reached out and touched his hand, and he looked at me and smiled like nothing was wrong, and maybe that was the moment I knew for sure, because the smile didn't reach his eyes, and it reminded me of the way people smile in photos when they're pretending to be happy for someone else. I started watching him more closely after that, when he thought I wasn't paying attention, and I began to notice patterns. He always left at the same time on certain days, always claimed he had a meeting or a deadline, and on those days Tessa was always mysteriously unavailable. She used to answer my texts in seconds. Now it could take her hours, and when she did respond, she was vague, distracted, uninterested, and I kept telling myself this was just life. People get busy, things change, nothing stays the same forever. But deep down, I was terrified that I was about to lose not just one person, but the two people I trusted most, the two people who knew every part of me. I felt like I was walking through a fog, not knowing what was real anymore, like I was living someone else's life, and I couldn't find my way back to mine. I stopped sleeping. I started having dreams where everything looked normal, but something was always just slightly off: a wrong face, a wrong voice, a wrong place. I woke up drenched in sweat, heart racing, eyes searching the dark room for something solid, something true, and when I couldn't find it, I cried quietly so no one would hear, so not even myself would know I was breaking inside. At work, I made more mistakes than usual. I sent shipments to the wrong addresses. I forgot to respond to emails. My manager pulled me aside and asked if everything was okay, and I said I was fine, because what else could I say? I didn't even know what was wrong, just that something was, and it was growing like a shadow that kept getting darker every day. I stopped going to the coffee shop where I met Leo because it reminded me of a time when I still believed in the story I thought we were writing together. I stopped listening to the playlist we made because every song felt like a lie. I started saving every receipt, every text message, every transaction, as if I could build a case for something I hadn't yet proven. I didn't know what I was preparing for, just that I needed to be ready for whatever truth was waiting for me. I started checking his phone when he was in the shower, even though it made me feel sick. I looked through his call logs, his messages, his photos, and most of the time I found nothing, or at least nothing I could point to and say this is it, this is proof. But there were small things: messages deleted, contacts saved under fake names, call logs cleared, and each time I found something like that, my heart cracked a little more. I wasn't stupid, I just didn't want it to be true, and the not knowing hurt more than the truth ever could. I started to feel like a stranger in my own life, like every step I took was on unstable ground, and I didn't know when it would collapse beneath me. The worst part was pretending I didn't notice, pretending I still believed, pretending I wasn't unraveling a little more each day. I smiled through dinners, I laughed through conversations, I nodded through meetings, but inside I was screaming and no one could hear me, and maybe that was the point, maybe that was why they thought they could get away with it because I made it so easy to underestimate me. I made it so easy to believe I would never fight back. I made it so easy to trust that I would always stay silent, and maybe I did for a while, but that silence wasn't empty. It wasn't weakness, it was the sound of something building, something waiting, something learning how to see in the dark. Because I didn't know yet what I was going to do, I just knew I couldn't go back, not to how things were, not to who I used to be, and one day soon I would stop pretending and they wouldn't see it coming, not until it was far too late. There is a moment right before everything falls apart when your heart already knows but your mind keeps fighting it, that moment where silence feels too loud and everything you see suddenly looks unfamiliar, like you are waking up in someone else's life and nothing fits the way it used to. I lived in that moment for weeks, stuck between what I feared and what I still wanted to believe, holding onto the hope that maybe I was wrong, maybe I had made it all up in my head, maybe they were still the people I loved, maybe I hadn't been betrayed, maybe I was just broken from the inside out and seeing ghosts where there were none. But ghosts don't check your bank account in the middle of the night and take what isn't theirs. Ghosts don't disappear for hours and come back smelling like someone else. Ghosts don't lie to your face and then kiss your forehead like they still care. And the worst part is not the betrayal itself, it's how ordinary it feels when it finally happens, how quiet, how simple. Like this was always going to be the ending and I just didn't want to see it. I remember the exact moment I found out I had gone to Tessa's apartment without warning, something I had done 100 times before. I still had the key she gave me when she moved in, a cheap little silver thing on a blue keychain with her name on it written in fading letters. I remember thinking as I stood at her door that maybe I was being crazy, maybe I would walk in and everything would be normal and I would laugh at myself and apologize for doubting her, but that's not what happened. When I opened the door, I saw Leo standing in her kitchen shirtless, drinking from a glass like he belonged there, and Tessa was behind him in one of his old hoodies, her hair wet from a shower. Their eyes went wide when they saw me, and for a second none of us moved, no one said anything, no one breathed, and in that silence I felt something in me break, not loudly, not dramatically, it was more like the quiet snap of something thin and vital, a thread that had been holding me together for too long. They didn't speak, and I didn't ask for explanations because there was nothing left to say. Everything I had doubted, everything I had feared was true, and I saw it in their faces, in the way Leo wouldn't meet my eyes, in the way Tessa looked like she was about to cry but didn't. I turned around and walked out without a word. I didn't slam the door, I didn't scream, I didn't collapse. I just walked and walked and walked until I found myself in a part of the city I didn't recognize. My phone kept buzzing, but I didn't look at it, not once. I didn't want apologies, I didn't want lies, I didn't want anything from either of them. The worst part wasn't that they did it, it was that they did it so easily, like it meant nothing, like I meant nothing. I sat on a bench near a park and stared at the people walking by, couples holding hands, children playing, friends laughing. And I felt like I was made of glass, invisible and fragile, like the whole world was still spinning and I had been left behind. I thought about everything I had shared with them, every secret, every vulnerable piece of me handed over in trust, and how they used all of it to destroy me, how they smiled to my face while plotting behind my back, how they took not just my money but my dignity, my belief in people, my sense of safety. And in that moment I could have fallen apart completely, but I didn't. I felt the tears sting my eyes and I let them fall quietly, but I didn't collapse because something else was rising inside me, something colder, something sharper, something that had been waiting in the background for too long. I went home and turned off my phone. I made tea. I sat in silence and stared at the bracelet on my wrist, the one Leo gave me, simple, elegant, strong, he had said, and I laughed because it felt like a joke now, and yet I didn't take it off, not yet, because I wasn't done with the story, not yet. The next morning, I called my bank and asked for full account statements for the last 6 months. I went through every transaction with a fine-tooth comb. I highlighted anything that looked out of place. I built a spreadsheet documenting every unauthorized withdrawal, every suspicious transfer. I called my work HR and requested the exact dates of my paycheck deposits. I compared those with what was actually in my account, and the gaps were undeniable. I opened an old email chain between me and Leo where we discussed creating the shared account. I saved every message, every attachment, every screenshot. I wasn't sure yet what I would do with all of it, but I knew I had to build the truth piece by piece like a case file, because this wasn't just personal anymore, it was calculated, and if they thought I would just walk away, they didn't know me at all. I began going through Tessa's social media quietly, found tagged photos I hadn't seen before, comments that seemed harmless but now read like confessions. I downloaded everything and stored it on an external drive. I created backup copies hidden in cloud storage. I made sure every digital step was traceable and preserved. They had used my trust to steal from me, but I would use the truth to take it all back. I didn't tell anyone what I was doing. I smiled at work, made small talk, kept my head down. I went to lunch with coworkers and laughed at things I didn't find funny. Wanted the world to think I was fine, because that was how I would win, not with rage, not with revenge served hot and messy, but with silence, with precision. I knew that if I showed any sign of breaking, they would feel validated. They would think I was the weak one, but I wasn't weak. I had been kind, I had been trusting, I had been human, and now I was awake. I began researching quietly, reading stories of financial fraud, identity theft, manipulation. I reached out to a lawyer anonymously to ask questions. I learned about what constituted financial abuse, what legal options were available. I began laying groundwork, not just to reclaim what was mine, but to ensure they couldn't do this to anyone else ever again. Also started documenting my emotional state, not in a journal but in a factual record. I kept a digital log of the panic attacks, the sleepless nights, the impact on my job, the toll it took on my health. I gathered everything like I was preparing for a trial, because in a way I didn't know if I would ever take them to court, but I needed to be ready. If I did, I needed to be able to look at myself one day and say I fought back. I didn't let them win. I kept the pain to myself because no one else could carry it, and no one else needed to. This was mine, and I would own every piece of it quietly and completely. The weeks passed, and I didn't speak to either of them. I didn't respond to their texts or voicemails or emails. I let the silence grow like a wall between us, and behind that wall I was building something stronger, something they couldn't see or touch or ruin. And every day I felt myself becoming someone new, someone who could survive this, someone who would never let it happen again. I wasn't ready yet, but I would be soon, and when I was, they would know, not because I told them, not because I warned them, but because everything they built together would start to fall apart, and they wouldn't even know why, not until it was far too late. There is a kind of strength that grows in silence, not the kind that breaks things or burns bridges, but the kind that watches, that learns, that waits. It is the strength of someone who has been broken but not destroyed, someone who has been stripped down to the bone and still found something worth saving. I lived in that silence for weeks after everything came crashing down, after I saw Leo and Tessa together, after I realized the depth of what they had taken from me, not just money or love, but trust, the kind of trust you only give once, maybe twice in a lifetime, and I would never give it again. But I also didn't want to live angry. I didn't want to waste my life thinking about what they had done and what they still might be doing. Instead, I wanted to be smarter than them. I wanted to use the very parts of myself they underestimated, my quiet, my discipline, my ability to fade into the background while watching everything. I didn't block their numbers. I wanted them to keep calling, to keep texting, to keep revealing things without knowing they were doing it. I read every message carefully. I analyzed every word, every shift in tone. I took notes. I tracked patterns. I listened to their lies and smiled, because the more they talked, the more I learned. I started wearing different clothes at work, brighter colors. I started smiling more, laughing louder, making people believe I was okay, because that gave me cover, that made people stop asking questions. And in that space of fake normalcy, I started building my plan. I changed all my passwords. I set up new bank accounts in different banks. I moved what little money I had left into separate places under different names. I got a prepaid phone and registered it under a fake ID. I used that phone for everything related to them. I bought a small second-hand laptop in cash and used it for tracking, building, documenting everything. I didn't want anything traceable back to my personal life, and the more layers I added, The safer I felt. I reread every contract Leo and I had signed together, including the shared account form. I found inconsistencies, small ones, things I could use. I created a timeline of their behavior before and after the betrayal, lining it up with financial records and communication logs. It was meticulous and exhausting, but it made me feel in control again. I also started learning things about Leo I hadn't known before: his clients, his projects, his digital footprint. I found portfolios that were partially plagiarized designs he had stolen from other creators and passed off as his own. I documented every one of them and took screenshots with metadata included. I discovered that he had lied on multiple contracts about his credentials, about his business registration status, and I archived it all. I created backups, encrypted them, stored them on flash drives and hidden folders. I sent copies to an anonymous email account I created only for this purpose and left recovery details with a lawyer friend of a friend, someone who owed me a favor and didn't ask questions. Tessa was more difficult because she had always been careful, cleaner in the way she moved, but I knew her better than anyone and I remembered things she forgot. She told me once about a shared cloud folder she used to store private files, photos, financial docs, and she had given me access years ago. She had probably forgotten about it, but I hadn't. I logged in and downloaded everything. It was mostly harmless, but there were a few things that mattered: screenshots of conversations between her and Leo about me, about what they were doing, receipts in her name for things I had paid for, trips, gifts, events, tickets, all of it in plain sight. I started creating a profile of her involvement, not just in the emotional betrayal, but in the financial one. I was building a case without telling anyone, without warning, without threat, because I didn't want them to fix what I was exposing. I wanted them to believe they had won so they wouldn't look behind them. While I caught up, I also started talking to people in their orbit, not obviously, not in a way that raised suspicion, just little conversations with former clients, mutual friends, people who had once admired them, people who had questions of their own. And slowly, gently, I started placing seeds of doubt. I asked questions I already knew the answers to and let their silence speak. I let their discomfort grow. I let the truth feel like a rumor, because rumors travel faster than facts, and when they finally land, they do more damage than truth ever could. I watched as cracks began to form, small things at first, like a client leaving a bad review, or a friend unfollowing them, or a vendor refusing to work with Leo again, and I didn't celebrate, I didn't gloat, I just kept going, kept building, kept collecting until I had everything I needed to make it all fall apart at once. And even then I waited, because timing was everything. I wanted the collapse to be complete, not rushed, not messy. I wanted them to lose slowly, piece by piece, the way I had. I started preparing anonymous tips to send to Leo's clients with evidence of plagiarism. I drafted emails to business forums with screenshots of forged credentials. I contacted the bank fraud department with the full report I had compiled, cross-referenced, and signed. I spoke to a private investigator under a pseudonym and gave him everything I had on Tessa, especially the receipts, the transfers, the messages. It wasn't about revenge anymore, not really. It was about justice, about balance, about making sure the truth had its moment to breathe. Didn't want to destroy them, I just wanted to stop them, and I wanted them to feel what it was like to wake up one day and realize that everything they built was not only gone but never real to begin with. And when I felt like everything was in place, when I was certain that every piece of the puzzle fit, I sat in my apartment surrounded by silence and stared at my computer screen for a long time. I could feel my heart pounding, not with fear, but with something else, something like release, and without hesitation, I clicked send, send, send. Each document, each report, each file flying out into the world like arrow, silent and swift and irreversible. And then I closed the laptop and made myself tea and sat by the window watching the sky shift into evening. I didn't cry, I didn't shake, I didn't smile. I just sat there, still, quiet, whole, because I knew the trap had been set and all I had to do now was wait. There is a kind of satisfaction that doesn't come from watching someone suffer, but from watching the truth finally take shape, from seeing every quiet step, every sleepless night, every carefully placed move come together like a puzzle, clicking into place, and that was what this felt like. Not revenge, not cruelty, but clarity and justice. And the first sign came quietly: an email from one of Leo's clients forwarded to me by a friend asking if I had seen what was being said on a local design forum. I clicked the link, and there it was, a post exposing Leo's plagiarism, comparing his portfolio to work that had been posted years before by other artists side by side. The images spoke louder than any words, and the comments below were brutal. Designers asking for refunds, clients asking for explanations, moderators tagging it as verified fraud. Within hours, the post was shared across multiple platforms, and Leo's online presence began to fracture like glass under pressure. His website went down, his social accounts went private. Within a day, I received another message, this time from someone I didn't know, someone who had seen Leo speak at a conference and now wanted to report him to the event organizers because of falsified credentials. And I knew it had begun. The unraveling I had built piece by piece was finally moving on its own, and I didn't have to lift another finger. I just watched as his professional reputation began to collapse. No one trusted him anymore. No one wanted to be associated with him, and the more he tried to defend himself, the worse it got, because the evidence was too much, too detailed, too precise, and every time he denied something, another screenshot, another email, another timestamp appeared to contradict him, and I could only imagine the panic behind his silence, the way he was probably scrambling, trying to understand how it had all happened so fast, not realizing that none of it was fast, it had just been invisible until now. And then came Tessa. Her unraveling was slower, more delicate, but no less devastating. It started with a client of hers filing a complaint with her employer, saying they had proof of misconduct, that they had received services billed to someone else's name, and the company launched an internal review, and within days they found discrepancies, purchases that didn't match her expense reports, emails that contradicted her claims. She was called into a meeting and didn't come back out. People started whispering, coworkers started pulling away, and her silence became heavier than words. She stopped posting online, stopped showing up to events, started vanishing from the spaces she used to command, and I knew exactly how it felt to be looked at like a stranger, like someone people thought they knew but never really did. And I didn't feel sorry for her. I didn't feel anything at all, because she had chosen this. She had chosen to lie, to steal, to betray, and now she was facing what that cost. I received a message from a mutual friend, someone who didn't know the full story, but had heard enough to ask if I was okay, and I said yes, I was more than okay, because for the first time in months, I wasn't pretending, I wasn't hiding, I was simply breathing in the silence I had earned. The reports I had filed with the bank had gone through, and after weeks of investigation, they ruled in my favor. I received partial reimbursement from insurance. But more importantly, a fraud case was opened under Leo's name, and now his name would be flagged in every financial system he tried to touch. I had spoken to legal counsel and filed a civil claim with all the documentation and evidence I had built, and while I knew these things took time, also knew that time was on my side, because I had nothing left to lose and everything to regain. And when I walked into that courtroom for the first hearing, I didn't wear anger or grief, I wore control. I wore the truth, and I didn't look at Leo or Tessa as they sat across from me. I didn't need to, because I wasn't there for them. I was there for myself, for the version of me they tried to erase, and that version stood taller than both of them combined. The hearing was brief, procedural, but the damage was already done. Their names now tied to public records, their actions laid bare under oath, their reputations reduced to filings and evidence, and I knew this was only the beginning, not of their downfall, but of my return. I walked out of that courthouse into the cold air and didn't feel cold at all. I felt clear, like I had been carrying something heavy for so long. I had forgotten what lightness felt like. I didn't want revenge anymore, because revenge is about pain, and pain had no place in me now. I only wanted distance and peace, and I was getting both, one page at a time. I had spent so many nights replaying the betrayal, asking why, wondering how, and now I didn't care anymore. The answers didn't matter, because the outcome had spoken louder than any explanation ever could. I changed my number, I changed my locks, I blocked every trace of them from my life, not out of fear but out of choice, because they no longer deserved access to the person I was becoming. I donated the bracelet Leo gave me to a thrift store in a part of town I never visited. I deleted the photos, wiped the messages, and in their place, I started writing something new, not a love story, not a tragedy, but a survival story, a quiet one, a strong one no one would see coming, just like they never saw me coming, and I liked it that way. I didn't need to shout my victory to the world because the people who needed to hear it already had. And the people who never saw me in the first place never would, and that was fine. I wasn't here to be seen, I was here to live, to heal, to rebuild, and I was doing all of that in silence, in full control, and with nothing left to prove. There is a moment after the storm, after the wreckage, after the dust settles, where everything is still and you finally understand what peace feels like, not because the pain is gone, not because the past is erased, but because it no longer holds power over you. And that was the moment I found myself in, standing at the edge of everything that had once broken me and realizing I wasn't broken anymore. I had walked through fire and silence and betrayal and loss, and I had come out not untouched, but unshaken. I had scars and cracks and stories I would never tell, but I also had something no one could take from me again. I had myself. I never went back to the coffee shop where I met Leo. I never passed by Tessa's street again. I didn't need to prove anything to anyone, least of all to them. The court case took months, and I showed up to every hearing dressed in control with folders and timelines and facts, and never once did I raise my voice. I let the truth speak. I let their silence speak louder. I watched as they stumbled through answers, tried to explain away timelines and transactions and messages, and I stayed still like stone because I had nothing to hide. They lost not just the case but the illusion they had created, the image of who they were to themselves and to each other, and I didn't celebrate, I didn't gloat, I just walked out of that courtroom and never looked back. I used the compensation I won not to replace what they stole but to rebuild what I had lost. I found a small apartment on the edge of the city, full of light and quiet. I furnished it piece by piece with things I loved, not because they were expensive or impressive, but because they felt like mine. I found a new job, not in logistics, not in numbers, but in something slower, more creative, something that let me breathe. I started volunteering once a week at a shelter where no one knew my name or my story, and that anonymity was a kind of healing. I stopped checking their names online. I stopped caring who they had become or what they were doing because that chapter had closed and I had no intention of reopening it. I began to laugh again, not the quiet, polite kind, but real laughter, the kind that starts in your chest and makes you forget for a second that you were ever hurt. I began to sleep through the night and dream of oceans and cities I had never seen, and instead of waking up with panic, I woke up with plans, not big ones, not dramatic ones, just small, quiet steps forward. I booked a train ride to a town I had never visited and spent the weekend walking streets with no memories. I took photos of strangers and sunsets and wrote notes in the margins of books I would later forget. I allowed myself to feel lonely and let that loneliness be soft, not bitter, not heavy, just a reminder that I was still human. I started saying no more often, no to people who drained me, no to things that didn't feel right, no to anything that reminded me of the girl I used to be. The girl who gave too much too easily, too quietly, and in her place I became someone else, not harder, not colder, but stronger, more honest. I began to trust again, but carefully, like someone placing glass on a high shelf, not out of fear, but out of respect for its fragility. I made new friends slowly, friends who didn't ask too many questions, friends who showed up without needing a reason. I learned to enjoy my own company, not as a fallback, but as a choice, and on quiet nights I would sit on my balcony with a cup of tea and watch the world move and know that I was finally still. I didn't forgive them, not because I couldn't, but because I didn't need to. Forgiveness is something you give when the pain still belongs to you, and mine didn't anymore. It belonged to the past, and the past could stay where it was. I never expected closure, not the kind people write about, not the kind that comes wrapped in apologies or explanations. I found closure in the way my own voice no longer shook when I spoke about what happened. I found closure in the way I no longer looked over my shoulder, in the way I no longer searched for their names, in the way I no longer felt like a victim. I wasn't just someone who had survived. I was someone who had rebuilt piece by piece, moment by moment, and no one got to own that story but me. Sometimes people ask how I stayed so calm, how I didn't explode or break down or burn it all to the ground, and I always smile because the truth is I did break down, I did fall apart, just not where anyone could see, and that made all the difference. I healed quietly, I planned quietly, I rose quietly, and when I struck back, it was with such precision that they never saw it coming. I became the storm they thought they had escaped, and then I became the silence that followed, and now I am just me, no longer afraid, no longer waiting, no longer wondering, just standing whole in a life I built from ashes, not perfect, not painless, but mine, and that is enough. Thank you for listening to my story with me.